I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Tim Davis, who is the Patrick L. and Debra Scheetz Ryan Endowed Professor in Biological Sciences. And he's going to talk through and give us an overview today of BGSU's research on water quality. So Tim, I turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kim. And thanks everyone for joining me today for this presentation. I'm really excited to talk about the work that Bowling Green State University is doing on water quality, both within the Great Lakes, primarily Lake Erie, but also, understanding our watersheds, because it's critically important that we understand our watersheds if we want to solve many of the water quality issues that we're facing in Lake Erie and throughout the Great Lakes region. So I'm gonna speak through my slides, and then after that, I'm looking forward to having a great conversation with all of you. Okay, so I spend most of my time talking about how phytoplankton, algae, cyanobacteria can harm us. So I always like to put a slide in my presentation that highlights all the good things about algae. So one critically important point is that, even though they comprise only about 1% of all plant biomass on Earth, they produce half the oxygen we breathe. Now, this takes into account the world's oceans and our freshwater bodies, but every second breath you take, that oxygen is coming from a phytoplankton somewhere in the world's oceans and lakes. So even here in Ohio, we are being directly impacted by the health of our oceans and freshwater systems. So we need to keep that in mind. Phytoplankton, or these microscopic plants, are the base of most aquatic food webs. So in a healthy aquatic food web, you will have a diverse phytoplankton or algal base to that food web. And I say most, not all, because there are some food webs in our world's oceans that don't have phytoplankton. Also, they help fight this increase in carbon dioxide concentrations that we're seeing globally, because they can capture carbon as they photosynthesize. They can capture that carbon, and especially in our world's oceans, when these phytoplankton die, they tend to congregate together and they sink very quickly into the depths of the ocean, which sequesters that carbon for about 1,000 years. So it's thought that carbon dioxide concentrations in our atmosphere would probably be about double what they are today if it was not for what we call the biological pump, or these phytoplankton kind of sucking up a lot of the carbon dioxide we're putting into the atmosphere and sequestering it at the bottom of the ocean. Now, those are just three really quick points to highlight the importance of phytoplankton in allowing us to have a healthy environment in which to live. But of course, too much of a good thing can lead to bad things. And this is where we come into, these harmful algal blooms, which are the visual manifestation of poor water quality. So when you see a harmful algal bloom, you pretty much know that that area has poor water quality. So what are harmful algal blooms and what do they look like? Well, they come in various colors, depending on the different types of pigments these phytoplankton are using. But you have, starting from the upper left, you have red tides, which occur in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Gulf of Maine. You have brown tides, which occur mainly in coastal systems in the Northeast US, in New York, for example, Chesapeake Bay, and even down in the Indian River Lagoon in Florida. But what I'm going to be spending most of my time talking to you about today are what we call these cyanobacterial harmful algal blooms, or cyanobacteria are commonly known as blue-green algae because they make waters look blue-green. So anytime you see discolored water, that's typically due to an algal bloom, and it's that visual representation of poor water quality. So the question we get asked all the time is, what causes these cyanobacteria, these blue-green algal blooms? And basically what it is it's excessive nutrients coming from the watershed into lakes. So phosphorus and nitrogen are the two critical nutrients that all plants need. And this is exactly, these cyanobacteria and phytoplankton are microscopic plants. So they need sunlight, they need water, and they need nutrients. So these nutrients, especially in the Great Lakes region, primarily come from agriculture, but that's not always the case. And it hasn't actually always been the case, even in the Great Lakes. They can come from urban settings, they can come from industry, they can come from, more rudimentary wastewater treatment plants, leaky or not maintained septic systems, urban runoff. So there are many different ways that nutrients can enter into lakes that will cause these blooms to occur. However, when we talk about Lake Erie and the blooms that are occurring now, it's really important that we understand that most of these nutrients are coming from agricultural runoff. So in order to fix our lake, we need to fix our watershed. And when we come into these cyanobacteria harmful algal blooms, or we call them CyanoHABs for short, mainly because we're lazy and we don't want to say cyanobacteria harmful algal blooms all the time. The reason why they're dangerous is not that they form and they are there, which can be an ecological problem, but we get into the human health aspect in that they produce these compounds that can be toxic to humans and other, terrestrial mammals like dogs and cats and cattle and birds, even marine mammals such as the southern sea otter. And the two types of toxins that we can find in the Great Lakes that, can impact human health here are what we call the liver toxins, also known as hepatotoxins. So microcystins and cylindrospermopsins are two types of liver toxins. Microcystins were the toxins that caused the 2014 Toledo water crisis, and it's the toxin that we deal with most in Western Lake Erie when it comes to having to treat our drinking water that we get from the western basin of Lake Erie. This is mainly the Toledo area. In Bowling Green here, we actually draw our water from the Maumee River, which can also have algal blooms. So we still have to take measures to prevent algal toxins from making it into our finished drinking water. But primarily in Western Lake Erie, we deal with the liver toxins or the hepatotoxins. However, globally, we also have very potent neurotoxins. So the liver toxins up top here, microcystin, before it was given that name, it was known as fast death factor because animals that ingested high concentrations of this toxin could die very, very quickly, and mainly due to internal liver bleeding. But neurotoxins such as anatoxin, which is this compound on the lower left here, that was known as very fast death factor because these are toxins that essentially paralyze an animal's ability to breathe, and they can die within 30 seconds to 2 minutes after ingestion. So these neurotoxins, anatoxin, saxitoxin, can be very potent. These liver toxins, microcystins, cylindrospermopsins, also can be very harmful to human health, which is why we take these blooms so seriously. And when we think about these blooms and we think about, them occurring in Western Lake Erie, it's really important to know that CyanoHABs occur in all 50 states, right? So this is a map from 2019 of all the news reports of harmful algal blooms throughout the continental US, and you can see that they occur in all 50 states. So this is not just a Ohio issue, it's not just a Western Basin of Lake Erie issue. This is a national and, quite frankly, global issue. And when we think about harmful algal blooms and we think about the frequency at which they're occurring, reports of algal blooms in the news have been increasing since 2010. So this is a figure from 2010 to 2019 of all the annual news reports. And you can see that they are increasing at an exponential rate. Now, there's a couple factors playing into why this may occur. One is that, we are seeing more of these events occur throughout the globe, including the continental US. But two, public awareness is increasing. So we can't just solely base this increase on ecology and biology, we also have to remember that people are just looking harder for these blooms. However, they are becoming more frequently reported in the news, which is something that should be alarming. And part of the reason why it's important that public awareness is increasing is that previously these blooms have been sometimes misidentified. The picture to your right is a bloom in Chautauqua Lake, which is in Western New York. It's a system in which my lab does some work out of. And this is a harmful cyanobacterial bloom that was occurring in that lake. However, the local residents, thought that, this bloom was just macrophyte seeds. So macrophytes are these benthic plants that grow in aquatic systems. They just thought they were seeds from macrophytes. So it's misidentification. So with more public awareness, with a better understanding of what these blooms are, gives a better ability of us to accurately report and detect these blooms across the country. And when we think about cyanobacterial blooms in the Great Lakes region, so going from a national perspective to a Great Lakes perspective, it's important to know that these blooms occur in all 5 of our Great Lakes. Even Lake Superior, one of the deepest, coldest lakes on Earth, in the western basin, this blue circle, near Duluth, right, and the St. Louis River, they have had a couple of very short-lived harmful algal blooms occur when the St. Louis River, when there's a lot of rain in that region, St. Louis River floods and pushes nutrients into that western portion of Lake Superior. We have seen algal blooms occur there. However, when we think about harmful algal blooms as it comes to Great Lakes, the western basin of Lake Erie, circled here in red, is really the poster child for large lakes that are being impacted by harmful algal blooms, even at a global scale. So it's important to remember that we live in a water-rich area. So the North American Great Lakes contain about 20% of Earth's available fresh surface water. So these lakes are being stressed from all different factors, whether it's climate change or invasive species or changes in watershed that's causing water quality issues. We are placing enormous pressure on this critical freshwater region, and one that we are lucky enough to live in. So we have to take responsibility for doing what we can to maintain the health of these systems. And so when we come into understanding the importance of the Great Lakes, not just from an ecological perspective, but also from a public policy perspective, the ecological history of Lake Erie is really, really important to understand. So I wanted to walk you through this because it's critically important that we understand that Lake Erie has played a major role in developing some of the pieces of legislation that have helped clean our fresh waters and our coastal waters throughout the country. So from the late 1800s, Ohio was booming with industrial growth, right? So cities like Cleveland became a focal points for this growth. But during that time, there were relatively few environmental protection laws, right? So pollution quickly became out of control in these regions. And that's because in the sense of, pollution, there was a common saying that dilution is the solution to pollution, which clearly isn't true, but that was the common mentality. And it was really Rachel Carson and her book Silent Spring that dispelled that myth. But during this time, Lake Erie became so polluted that we became the punchlines of jokes, right? And by the mid-1960s, Lake Erie was experiencing many of the same issues as today. It was experiencing harmful algal blooms. It was experiencing low oxygen levels in the central basin off of Cleveland, and it was considered to be a dead lake. And that is really concerning for many reasons. We even made it into the Lorax, right? So in Dr. Seuss's environmental book for children, when he's talking about the hummingfish, you know, the last line in the original text of the Lorax was taking this, and I won't read the text, but he says, I hear things are just as bad up in Lake Erie, right? So that was a reference to the issues that Lake Erie was experiencing in terms of its water quality. However, in parallel, there were a lot of important discoveries being made, and this is up at the Experimental Lakes area in Western Ontario. There was a lot of research being conducted as to what's causing these types of events in freshwater systems, and a researcher named David Schindler conducted these large whole lake experiments, and I won't go into all of them, but basically he found that phosphorus was a driving nutrient in causing harmful algal blooms in freshwater systems. So therefore, a lot of public policy started to revolve around decreasing phosphorus inputs into lakes. We don't want to totally annihilate phosphorus because we need phytoplankton to grow for our healthy food web. But too much phosphorus can cause these harmful algal blooms to occur. We also know now that nitrogen and phosphorus are both critically important, and therefore we need to control both nitrogen and phosphorus coming off our watershed. But at this time, it was really a lot of the environmental policy was focused on reducing phosphorus. So the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, which is a binational agreement between the US and Canada, and the Clean Water Act were two really important. One was a piece of legislation, the other was this binational agreement in where both the US and Canada said that we are going to reduce total phosphorus, so the amount of phosphorus coming into Lake Erie, significantly, right down to 11,000 metric tons per year. And what this did was something pretty amazing. Lake Erie went from a dead lake to a lake that was considered a global example of large lake restoration. And by the mid-1980s, we considered the nutrient issues to be solved in Lake Erie. And this was a fallacy on our part because when we think about lakes, we thought about them as either broken or fixed. So we thought we had fixed Lake Erie and we turned our attention to other issues that were starting to plague the Great Lakes. Not that these issues shouldn't have gained attention, but we moved on to invasive species such as the zebra mussels, mercury contamination, other issues that came to light because we said we fixed the nutrient problem in Lake Erie. Well, we even convinced Dr. Seuss. So there were a couple of researchers from Ohio State or from Ohio Sea Grant that wrote to Dr. Seuss and said, listen, you know, your book is making us look bad. We've actually significantly improved the health of Lake Erie, and we'd like you to reconsider that line in your text. And I don't know the exact conversation, but essentially we convinced Dr. Seuss to remove that line from his book. So versions of the Lorax that were printed after 1986 no longer have this line. Unfortunately for us, the Lorax has come back because we took our eye off the ball. And again, Lake Erie is experiencing harmful algal blooms, eutrophication, and a large dead zone in the central basin of Lake Erie. So we've, again, reverted to the state in which we were previously. However, the source has changed from being mainly industrial to more agricultural, and that is a tougher problem to solve. And Lake Erie blooms are increasing in severity. I'm going to move through this slide relatively quickly, but we know that if you look at this figure on the right-hand side of your screen, this is the NOAA's severity index for harmful algal blooms in Western Lake Erie. And the green bars represent on a scale of 0 to 10 how intense, how large, right, that bloom is going to be in terms of surface area. And we can see that these bars are, for the most part, increasing. So you're seeing an increase from 2002, and this goes all the way up to 2018. This past year was a little less severe, but overall blooms are increasing. And we know that climate change is also going to continue not just to increase the severity of the blooms, but to expand the timing in which the blooms can occur. So the blooms will start to occur earlier because the lake will warm earlier, and they will stick around later because the lake will stay warmer later. So we're going to see blooms that are more intense, that last longer, and potentially are more toxic due to climate change. And of course, you know, a lot of what was happening in Lake Erie from 2002 to 2013 remained somewhat under the radar nationally because it was an ecological event that was occurring, but it really wasn't having too much of an impact on human health. However, that all changed in 2014 due to the Toledo water crisis, which put the blooms in Lake Erie on a national and international stage, and also raised the awareness that these blooms are starting to impact human health and need to be taken. And it basically forced our many of the lawmakers. We've been fortunate in this area where our local lawmakers have been dedicated to solving this problem, but on a national scale, it drew attention to these issues across the country. However, it also had unintended consequences where, because of this event, whenever a public utility is unable to provide a service, it has lasting impacts. And what we're seeing is that, bottled water use is increasing across the nation, not just in this region, but across the nation. And this has an economic as well as ecological impact because bottled water is expensive for what it is. It's about 4 times the amount per gallon as a gallon of gas. If you were to buy it, at a 16-ounce bottle at a gas station, is the amount that you would pay for that is equal to about $7.60 a gallon, which is much higher than the $2.20 that we pay for gas right now. And this is somewhat insane because it comes from a perception that tap water is not safe to drink due to degrading water quality issues. Not only that, you have all the plastic that comes with bottled water, and if that's not taken care of properly, that can end up in our world's oceans and lakes, leading to other environmental issues due to the use of bottled water. And this just is another figure that shows really nicely. This goes up to 2014. But one, it shows as a nation that we are increasing our use of bottled water. Even though tap water is cheap and comes out of our faucet, the use of bottled water has been increasing across the US for many different reasons. Some legitimate. There is reason to drink bottled water, especially after incidents like Flint. Short-term emergency situations, bottled water can be very useful, but when it's used on a day-to-day basis is where it can have those lasting impacts because we are creating a lot of waste and we are spending a lot of money on something that should come out of our tap clean and ready to drink. So all of that to say, this is a background. So what is BGSU doing and how are we assisting with water and watershed issues locally and across the globe? Well, we are establishing a Center for Great Lakes and Watershed Studies. I direct this center. I'm very fortunate to do that. And our vision is to conduct cross-disciplinary research that spans from the watershed into our Great Lakes to answer the big questions we need to answer in order to develop the policies that we need to develop in order to improve and maintain the health of our Great Lakes. And we do this through research, education, and public engagement. And the structure of the center is that we conduct stakeholder-driven research at our core. We would like to develop some on-lake infrastructure, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We work nationally and internationally with collaborators. We have a fantastic cohort of master's and PhD students and undergraduate research assistants. We engage with community members. We participate in citizen science. And all of this is to be able to develop solid policy and understand the socioeconomic implications of poor water quality in our region and across the globe. And right now we have 10 faculty members from 3 different departments participating in the center. You can see them here. I won't go through all of their expertise, but we have a range of expertise and we collaborate across many different projects in order to address and hopefully solve our region's most critical water quality and watershed issues. We're also building research infrastructure. Over the past couple of years, we've been really fortunate to be able to expand our on-lake research fleet. So our nearshore research vessel, the RV Falcon, was purchased in 2019. And last year, through a generous donation from the Ryan family, we were able to purchase our flagship research vessel, the RV Ziggy, which is primarily docked in Sandusky Bay, where we do most of our research, and has been a fantastic tool for our students to be able to get on the lake and conduct their science when they need to. So both of these pieces of infrastructure have been critical in us expanding the right research that we can conduct. And we hope to continue to expand that through the development of an on-lake research and education center in Sandusky Bay, or in the city of Sandusky, focused on Sandusky Bay. We also have federal funding. This is a grant that my colleague George Bullerjon is leading, and this is a $5.2 million National Science Foundation, National Institute for Environmental Health Science grant that involves 8 different universities and federal organizations, where we are one of 3 of these federally funded centers across the nation. And this is to link the impacts of water quality, primarily harmful algal blooms, and human health. So if you'd like to learn more about that, you can I can discuss it after, or you can look up the center. There's a nice website and all the questions that we're answering and the researchers that are involved. And finally, we take the knowledge that we learn from Western Lake Erie and the other Great Lakes, and we apply it to projects across the globe. So right now, we are working with colleagues in collaborative projects pretty much on every continent except South America and Antarctica. We are working primarily in East Africa on the African Great Lakes. So our Great Lakes to Great Lakes project is funded through the National Science Foundation. And we're going to be taking 10 students a year for 20 days to Lake Victoria to study the harmful algal blooms that are occurring in that system and comparing them to the harmful algal blooms that are occurring in Lake Erie. So they're going to expand their collaboration base. We are going to be working with our Kenyan colleagues to hopefully address similar issues between the African Great Lakes and the North American Great Lakes when it comes to water quality. So with that, I'd just like to thank you for your attention. I know I moved relatively quickly. It's a short presentation, but at this point, I'd love to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Tim. We've got a question here. Have the students and grad students been able to continue the research on the lake this past summer, or is it on hold? And I'm assuming that that's because the question comes from a COVID perspective. How has COVID impacted research?
Absolutely. So great question. Our students have been fortunate to be able to continue to conduct their monitoring and their research out on the lake. We've taken all the necessary precautions by limiting students, wearing face masks, but luckily our research has been able to move forward even through COVID, although it has had implications for overall monitoring in Western Lake Erie, because there were certain organizations that were not able to get out as frequently as they would have liked. But for our students, we were able to. So great question.
I was wondering, Tim, you talked there that the center takes on the main big questions. Can you sort of talk about the top 3 that are a priority right now?
Absolutely. So one is understanding the drivers of bloom growth and toxin production and how those might change with a changing climate. 2, what are practices we can implement in the watershed that will help reduce nutrient runoff into the Maumee River primarily, but into Western Lake Erie? Because what we need to do is we need to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus runoff into the lake if we want to reduce the severity and impact of these blooms. So we collaborate very closely with a number of different farmers and different research organizations around the region. And 3rd is really trying to understand the socioeconomic impacts of harmful algal blooms on our region. So not just how they might continue to negatively affect our region, but also if we improve the health of our lake, how would we improve, the socioeconomic impacts of a healthier Lake Erie to our region?
Okay. We have another question here. Besides the green algae on the lake, I've seen white bubbly algae on top. Is this the same kind of toxins, and are they harmful too?
Good question. I've not seen white bubbly algae, although usually when algae turns white, it's dying. So there is a lot of foam that can accumulate on the lake. And sometimes that can be mistaken, but that's a hard question to answer without a visual. But what I will say is that, you know, these blooms, and, you know, as they die, they can change colors from green to a blue, and they can even bleach. But if there's a high biomass there, you know, there's potential for toxins to be there, and that water should be avoided.
Are there other questions that? I think we got a thanks. Well, we thank you very much, Tim, for taking your time to share your expertise and help us understand how all this works and what we can do to keep our water safe and healthy. So thank you so very much.